Okay, so this is an overview of the two Sanskrit epics famous in Hinduism, the Ramayana and Mahabharata. They are significant, especially because the main protagonists, or two of the main protagonists in each stories, are, from the point of view of Hinduism, avatars or bodily incarnations or earthly births of Vishnu, the god Vishnu. So this is Rama in the Ramayana, who is said to be the seventh incarnation in this world age of Vishnu, and Krishna, one of the characters in the Mahabharata, who is said to be the eighth incarnation of Vishnu. I always ask at this point when teaching this live if it's a strange idea for God to come to earth as a human being, and that and generally students think for a minute, if I'm teaching this in a majority Christian audience, generally students think for a minute. I used to teach at Loyola before this. And after they thought for a minute, they say, well, no, I mean, not really, because Jesus. So the idea that time is infinite and cyclical and that God comes to earth, in fact, an infinite number of times, because he comes to earth 10 times every series of 4 world ages. That is, of course, not a part of Western monotheism. But the idea of God incarnate certainly is. I mean, obviously the theology is different, but the notion of God in some form coming to earth is not entirely alien to Western monotheistic sensibilities. The Ramayana and Mahabharata are both about 2,000 years old. We don't know the exact dating, and almost surely the stories themselves were much older and a part of oral storytelling tradition, and then finally written down in Sanskrit about 2,000 years ago. These are, all Hindus know these stories. I mean, these are the most famous stories. Both the Ramayana and Mahabharata are encyclopedic in their scope. So there's the main story, but then there are all these little side stories explaining, oh, one time Shiva did this, one time Brahma did this. This is how the leopard got its spots. This is why Indra is covered in 1,000 eyes. So both of the epics are reference works for classical mythology in general, along with the Puranas. They share many of the same stories with the Puranas, and they're still very popular today. Both epics, especially the Ramayana, have been retold not in Sanskrit, but in all of the vernacular languages of India. There's even a Persian Muslim version of the Ramayana. Today there are film and TV renditions of both of the epics. In India today, Rama and the Pandava brothers are popular heroes. Stories from the epics are popular bedtime stories. Many Hindus are named after the characters in both of the epics. One thing that's noteworthy about the Ramayana and Mahabharata are that while the characters, stories, and settings are different, the basic outline of the plot is essentially the same in both stories. Both involve rightful heirs to the throne being ejected from their kingdom, actually exiled into the wilderness for a period of 12 to 14 years, fighting some kind of battle, and then reclaiming the throne at the end. So both the Ramayana and Mahabharata share the same, what we might call, basic story matrix. And this is also, by the way, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Jainism and Buddhism because they're so closely related to Hinduism, and especially to this period of classical Hinduism. This is also, in some sense, the story matrix of the biographies of Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, and Siddhartha Gautama, the founder of Buddhism. So both are born princes. They leave the throne. They spend a period of time in the wilderness, studying with different teachers and exploring their spirituality. Then after 6 years in the case of Gautama Buddha, 12 years in the case of Mahavira, they obtain enlightenment and they return to society in order to teach. This is not accidental, by the way. The Hindu epics, the Puranas, the narratives of the founding of Jainism and Buddhism were all contemporary and all came from North India from around 2,500 to 2,000 years ago. So all of these traditions were in contact with one another, and while they differ on various philosophical and theological points, share much of the same understanding in terms of basic ideas about reincarnation, karma, and in this case, the significance of what you might call the semiology of the forest and the city. So cities are, they're very safe places where everything goes on. They're the centers of cultural life. Forests are dangerous and scary places. They're the places where there are bandits and wild animals and even ghouls and demons and spirits and stuff. But there are also places where the yogis and the wise men and the seekers and the mystics hang out in their secluded ashrams where they're doing meditation and yoga. And these people, it was believed, held certain superordinary powers. They are the teachers of the gurus of the Upanishads, and they are also the bearers of advanced knowledge of magic spells, mantras, weaponry, and the martial arts. So in the case of both of the epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and also in the case of Jainism and Buddhism, you have this theme of leaving the city, going into the forest, making discoveries. So these are religious discoveries in the case of Jainism and Buddhism, and then returning to either employ what you have learned through some sort of military means or teach what you have learned as a teacher of the spiritual dharma back in the city again. So the story cycle of exile and return is a basic theme in each case. I'm inserting here a 9-10 minute summary of the Ramayana. I'm also going to try to put a link below this video because the audio quality isn't 100% here. So if you want to click the link and watch it with HD audio, go ahead. Otherwise, the next 10 minutes or so is a summary of the Ramayana.
Long, long ago in India, there lived a great king called Dasarath, who ruled from his capital of Ayodhya. He had 3 wives called Kaikeyi, Kaushalya, and Sumitra. But he was very sad because he had no children. So he arranged for a fire sacrifice, out of which came a pot of special prasadam, which he presented to all his wives. In due course of time, his queens gave birth to 4 wonderful sons. Kaushalya became the mother of Ram. Kaikeyi was the mother of Bharat, and Sumitra's sons were Lakshman and Shatrughna. Ram and his brothers were all incarnations of the Supreme Lord. The 4 princes were loved dearly by their parents. They learned the art of fighting with bows and arrows and with swords and shields. They grew into brave and powerful warriors. They learned how to rule wisely, treating the citizens as their very own family. At Sita's Swayamvara ceremony, Ram broke the bow of Shiva and won the hand of the beautiful Princess Sita. They married and lived happily together in Ayodhya. One day, King Dasarath decided it was time to retire and to hand over the kingdom to his eldest son Ram. The citizens were overjoyed and happily prepared to crown Ram the new king. They swept the roads till they were spotless and sprinkled them with scented water. They hung garlands on the gates and doorways and decorated every building with flags and festoons. But within the palace, there lived a wicked and hunchback maidservant who convinced Queen Kaikeyi that her son Bharat should be crowned king and not Ram. Kaikeyi asked King Dasarath to give her 2 wishes. First, she asked for her own son Bharat to be made king. And secondly, she asked him to banish Ram to the forest for 14 years. Dasarath fainted in shock. He had made a promise, and as the king, he had a duty to keep his word. When Ram heard this news, he was not disturbed at all and tried to console his grieving father. Sita and Ram's brother Lakshman decided to join him during his exile. All three gave up their royal garments and put on simple clothes. All the citizens were crying as they passed through the city gates and entered the forest, where they were to live for the next 14 years. Life in the forest was simple but happy. Ram and Lakshman built a cottage. Sita collected fruits and vegetables. With their bow and arrows, Ram and Lakshman killed many demons who were disturbing the peace of the sages living within the forest. Ram, Lakshman, and Sita lived happily. That is, until the 14th and final year. One day, an evil Rakshasi named Surpanak saw Ram. His elegant and divine features captivated her, and she longed to marry him. She flew into a jealous rage and rushed at Sita. Lakshman stepped forward and with his knife sliced off her nose and ears. Screaming, she fled off into the jungle to tell the evil Ravana all that had happened. A few days later, Sita saw a beautiful golden deer. She said to Ram, "I'd love to have it as my pet. Please get it for me." Ram was very suspicious. "This is no ordinary deer. It may be an illusion created by a magician." So he told Lakshman to stay and guard Sita, then set off to capture the deer. But it was a trick, and the deer imitated Ram's voice and cried out, "Lakshman, help me! Help me!" Lakshman knew that no one could defeat Ram, but Sita begged him to go and help his brother. Before he left, Lakshman created a magic circle around the cottage to protect Sita. "Under no circumstances must you go out of this magic circle," he told Sita. Then he went off to look for Ram. Ravan, king of the Rakshasas, was waiting. Taking on the disguise of a sage in the forest, he tricked Sita into leaving the magic circle. Springing forward, he grabbed Sita and bundled her into his chariot, which soared through the skies towards his capital of Lanka. Hearing Sita's cries for help, the brave vulture Jatayu flew towards the chariot to help Sita. But Ravana cut off his wings, and Jatayu fell to the ground. Ram and Lakshman later found the dying Jatayu, who was able to tell them that Ravana had taken Ram's wife. The two brothers searched everywhere for any clue to Sita's whereabouts. They enlisted the help of an army of monkey warriors who helped them with their search. Because of his great courage and strength, Hanuman was chosen to find Sita. With a single leap, Hanuman flew across the ocean to Ravana's island of Lanka. There he found Sita, sitting in a grove of Ashok trees, where she was constantly shedding tears for her husband Ram. Hanuman assured Sita that he would soon return with Ram to save her. Ravana captured Hanuman and set fire to his tail, but Hanuman escaped and jumped from building to building until all of Lanka was on fire. He again leapt into the skies and returned to Ram's army, who were waiting on the shores of the ocean. Ram told the monkey warriors to throw boulders into the sea, and by his mystic power, the rocks floated on the water and formed a bridge all the way to Lanka. Cheering, the army marched to Ravana's capital. Ravana's army of demons fired their weapons, and the monkey warriors hurled trees and rocks back at them. A mighty battle took place. When Ravana heard that many of his generals had been killed, he became very angry. He joined his army and showered arrows onto the monkey warriors. Ram invoked a celestial weapon. Fixing the arrow to his bow, he released it towards the demon's chest. It hissed through the air and struck Ravana, who fell down to the ground, dead. When Sita saw her husband once again, her lotus-like face blossomed with joy. After going through fire to show her purity, she and Ram boarded their flower airplane and with Lakshman and Hanuman returned to Ayodhya. Their citizens were overjoyed and lit millions of oil lamps to light up the city of Ayodhya. Seeing their king Ram returning after so long, the citizens offered flower garlands and danced in great jubilation. Bharat, Ram's younger brother, with eyes full of tears, welcomed Ram home. Shri Ramachandra Bhagavan ki Jai.
Just a little bit about the geography of the Ramayana. Ayodhya, the kingdom where Rama is from, is up here in, well, it's identified as being in Uttar Pradesh in modern India, way up here almost by Nepal. Lanka it's a mythological place in the Ramayana. And the subject of my book that I'm writing right now is how the island of Sri Lanka becomes Lanka eventually, centuries on in the tradition. And one of the things I'm interested is in the inversion of the moral valences of the story, whereby in South India and Sri Lanka, in the really over the past 100 years, they've come to say, oh no, actually Rama was the bad guy and Ravana was the good guy, that Rama chopped off Ravana's sister's nose and he was the aggressor in all of this, and Ravana was just defending his sister, and that Ravana was actually a great, just king, and he had this massive empire that stretched all the way to Africa and Australia and all this stuff. So I talk endlessly about that. Ask me about it personally. Well, we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about it later on in the class. But many have pointed out, including those who have tried to reclaim Ravana as a historical king or a cultural hero for the South India, have pointed out that Rama comes from North India, which historically had some cultural hegemony over South India. So the Vedas come from over here. North India is Hinduized first. This is primarily Vaishnava Hinduism, which treats Vishnu as the supreme god. And South India is primarily Shaivite Hinduism. Shiva, as we'll see 2 weeks from now, is an indigenous god of the Indian subcontinent. And so just in terms of the basic geography of the story, commentators have pointed out that it is, for some, reinforcing this idea that North India is a civilizing force of South India. This was the claim among those in the Dravidian independence movement in the early 20th century, who were suggesting that South India become its own independent nation from North India. That never happened. But this is a very old theme in the story that people have picked up on in the modern era. A controversial episode in the original Sanskrit version of the epic, which is the Ramayana of Valmiki. Valmiki is the author of the Sanskrit version that's very famous. And this is Sita's Agni Pariksha, or her voluntary subjection to standing within the flames of a fire as what is called a satyakriya, or an act of truth in Sanskrit, in order to prove to Rama and his army after her rescue that she hadn't slept with Ravana during her time in captivity. So this is to prove her purity, that is, her chaste devotion to her husband Rama. Now, many commentators, not just in the modern era, but historically, Hindu commentators have said that this seems unreasonable, that this seems unfair of Rama to have ever expected anything of his queen, who is, by the way, also a goddess. Just as Rama is an incarnation of Vishnu, Sita is an incarnation of Lakshmi, who is Devi. But the fact that she has to stand inside a fire without being burnt to prove her chastity is exemplary, nonetheless, of a kind of inherently patriarchal mode of storytelling. In both the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the female protagonist, Sita in the case of the Ramayana and Draupadi in the case of the Mahabharata, although there are strong dimensions to their character, as outlined in the piece by Naomi Appleton, are also in large part damsels in distress. An alternative title for later Sanskrit versions of the Ramayana is the Janaki Harana, or the theft of Sita. The entire premise of the action of the story is Ravana's abduction of Sita and Rama's quest to retrieve her. So I'm leaving it as one of the two paper options for next week to write about this problem of agency and power as it relates to the characters of Sita and Draupadi as they are portrayed in these epics, and as relates to dynamics of gender power in the classical Hindu imaginary, and also today. So I'm trying to relate this to problems for today in the optional essay that I've crafted for next week. In teaching the epics, the question always comes up: do Rama and Krishna know that they are God? And the answer in the case of Krishna, which we'll talk about in a minute, is yes, Krishna absolutely knows that he's God. In the case of Rama, the answer is less clear. Later on in the tradition, and for example, in the 16th century Hindi version of the Ramayana, Tulsidas's Sri Ramacharita Manasa, there's less question of Rama's divinity. Clearly, he is Vishnu. He's worshipped as Vishnu throughout the story. He's aware of it. In the original epic, Valmiki's Sanskrit version, sometimes it seems like Rama knows that he's God, and sometimes it doesn't. And how do we account for such ambiguities in the text? We can, on the one hand, view Valmiki's version as the product of a long tradition of storytelling, onto which the notion that Rama is an incarnation of Vishnu was later imposed. This, I mean, it could be historically true, but it doesn't answer the question of how Hindus themselves have viewed the story and understood Rama's divinity within the Sanskrit version of the epic. Hindu commentators on the story have emphasized the imperfect nature of Rama, questioning how it is that a perfect being, God, Vishnu, would have allowed Sita to be kidnapped in the first place. It's also, I'll just say parenthetically, a major issue of scholarly debate whether or not Rama is clearly or knows that he's God in the Valmiki version. So actually, just over the past couple of days in the scholarly listserv that I'm on, the Religion in South Asia listserv, people have been sharing articles about this very topic. So I just included this in here. A lot of scholarship on it. A lot of people try to answer this question because the answer is not 100% clear within the text itself. I'll just like to point out a little bit towards answering this question that the importance of God as a perfect being isn't really a theological imperative for Hindus as it is for Christians. So much of the discussion of Vishnu's motivation for taking bodily form in the later tradition is accounted for out of his desire to experience the full range of what it means to be human. And this is part of what I'm going to talk about next week when I discuss bhakti, wherein, according to later Vaishnavas, Vishnu as Krishna wanted to be born on earth actually as a woman because he had never been born as a woman before, and he wanted to experience the full range of what it means to be human, the full range of emotions, the full range of desires. So he is born in this later Bengali figure, Chaitanya, as Krishna in the mode of Radha, or Krishna with the mind of his wife, his consort Radha. And to experience the full range of what it is to be human doesn't necessarily imply perfection. To be human is to be imperfect also. And so the point is, I think that Vishnu, who comes to earth so many times, who has so many different experiences, who is God, doesn't need to be necessarily morally perfect in the way that it's demanded of a savior figure, or as might be expected from the point of view of Western monotheism. The Mahabharata is the second of the two epics. It's really long, so this is the complete Sanskrit version of the Mahabharata. If you look at it in the library, it consists in 75,000 verses. It's 10 times longer than Homer's Odyssey. or longer than the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare combined. And this is in large part because, as I said, it has all of these sub-stories and sub-frames that don't relate directly to the narrative at hand, but which represent an index of important events relating to Hindu mythology. And the plot of this epic is the story of two brothers who are kings, the blind king Dhritarashtra, who is the elder brother of Pandu. And since Dhritarashtra was blind, he was passed over for royal succession in favor of his younger brother, but then took over the kingdom of Hastinapura when Pandu subsequently renounced the throne. But because both of the brothers had a claim to the throne, their children, the 5 sons of Pandu, the Pandavas, and the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, competed amongst themselves for control of the kingdom. The Pandavas, the 5 brothers, are essentially the good guys of the story. Krishna here, the incarnation of Vishnu, is on their side. He is the chariot driver of Arjuna, who's one of the 5 Pandava brothers. The Pandavas are, of course, not completely perfect. Yudhishthira, the oldest of them, has one major flaw, that he is a gambling addict, essentially, and he ends up gambling away the kingdom to his cousins, led by Duryodhana. He even gambles away their wife, Draupadi, and the end result is that the 5 Pandava brothers are banished for 12 years, and then they have this probationary year where they're allowed to come back, but they can't be seen by anybody. So they're banished. They're basically exiled for 13 years. The culmination of this is a great battle wherein the Pandavas retake the kingdom from their cousins. So here again is a short, very short video summary of the Mahabharata, after which I will return to talk about the Bhagavad Gita.
Great India, then, tells the story of 2 sets of cousins, the 5 sons of the dead king Pandu, the Pandavas, and the 100 sons of Pandu's brother, blind king Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, who become bitter rivals and oppose each other in war for possession of the land. The Kauravas had a grotesque, demonic birth. The Pandavas were instead actually fathered by gods and are assisted throughout the story by divinities and seers, including Vyasa, author of the poem.
What's your poem about?
It's about you.
Me?
Yes. It's the story of your race. How your ancestors were born, how they grew up, how a vast war arose. It's the poetical history of mankind. If you listen carefully, at the end, you'll be someone else.
Oh, I see. Duryodhana and all his brothers want to kill. Ow!
They grow up together, but from early onwards, the Kauravas behave viciously towards the Pandavas.
As they get to be 18 or 20 years old, the rivalry becomes more and more intense, till it comes to fighting for who is going to win the hand of the beautiful princess Draupadi. And one of the brothers of the Pandava, Arjuna, wins her. But because their mother unknowingly says, share her between the 5 of you, Draupadi becomes the joint wife of all the 5 Pandava.
We will marry her. All 5 of us.
Yes. In India, we believe that the 5 Pandavas are the 5 senses. And we have a lovely story which says that if the 5 Pandavas are the 5 fingers, the palm is Draupadi, and that is how it becomes a strong fist. But without the palm, the 5 fingers would never be united. In each husband, one sees one quality. The eldest is Yudhishthira. He is the one who is born of righteousness and knowledge. The next is Bhima, the son of the god of wind, supposed to be the strongest in the world. The next is Arjuna, and he is the perfect warrior. The next 2 are twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, the highest forms of knowledge and wisdom. Each one is but a part of a totality. But when they are united, it becomes the complete human nature. And that is how really we think of the Pandava and Draupadi. For millennia.
For your wives.
But I want to be discontented, dissatisfied.
The malice of the Kaurava cousins and their leader Duryodhana comes to a head when they take advantage of the eldest Pandava, Yudhishthira, who now rules the land.
Now, Yudhishthira is otherwise a very virtuous man, but his one weakness is gambling. And he comes knowing that the game will probably be rigged. And over days and days of playing,
I have won.
loses one after another every single possession.
I have won.
Till he finally comes down to owning nothing but himself and his
I
family.
have won. My cards, my moves, my go. I have won. My forest.
He cannot stop. It is like something has possessed him.
I have won. My land. I have won. My kingdom. All that I possess.
Bhishma!
And one by one, he plays and loses each brother. And finally, he loses himself and says, I don't have anything else. And Duryodhana, who has wanted Draupadi from the beginning, says, but you can play Draupadi. They once again play, lose once again, and are exiled into the forest for 12 years, somewhere where they cannot be found.
The Pandavas fulfill their part of that bargain, but their opponent Duryodhana is unwilling to restore them a small part of the kingdom even when their exile has expired, and even when their friend, the god Krishna, pleads on their behalf.
Yudhishthira, who does not want to wage war, sends Krishna to the Kauravas saying, I don't want my kingdom. I will take 5 cities or 5 villages or even 5 houses, and I will avoid war. And Duryodhana says, I will not
give 5 villages. I will not give 1 village. I will not give the point of a needle of earth.
Let one thing be certain. You will have your glorious death. If the earth is clamoring for victims, we will see a splendid massacre.
And a third expression of the Supreme Soul is Vishnu, creator and sustainer of worlds, incarnating on earth in various forms throughout the ages to assist us on our way. To many, Buddha was such an incarnation. And in the Mahabharata, the god Vishnu has come down as Krishna, charioteer and friend of the Pandavas, as they faced battle and the horror of killing family and friends.
Arjuna is the commander-in-chief of the Pandavas' army, with Krishna as his charioteer. And they go in to begin the war, and suddenly Arjuna loses confidence in everything that he's about to do. And he falls at Krishna's feet and says, I cannot fight.
Krishna, my legs grow weak. My mouth is dry, my body trembles. My bow slips from my hand. Uncle, cousins, nephews, and Drona, my teacher, they are all there. I can't bring death to my own family.
And it is then that Krishna turns to him and tells him words that become the Bhagavad Gita, the song of Krishna.
The Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's advice to war leader Arjuna on the eve of battle, is not only the central part of the epic, it is the very core of Indian thought, and as sacred to Hindus as the New Testament is to Christians.
Krishna led Arjuna through the tangled forest of illusion, through all the fibers of his spirit. He showed him the deepest movements of his being, and his true battlefield, where you need neither warriors nor arrows, where each man must fight alone. He taught him how the world unfolds. He spoke for a long time, very long time, between the two armies preparing to destroy themselves.
the Bhagavad Gita as a précis of everything that is Hinduism, and basically tells Arjuna of what right action and right thought are.
Right action, called dharma, is the main motive of the Mahabharata.
What is Krishna doing?
He's telling Arjuna that victory and defeat are the same. He's urging him to act, but not to reflect on the fruit of the act. He says to him, seek detachment. Fight without desire.
You say, forget desire, seek detachment. Yet you urge me to battle, to massacre. Your words are ambiguous. I am confused.
Krishna tells him, don't withdraw into solitude. Renunciation is not enough. You must act, yet action mustn't dominate you.
In the heart of action, he must remain free from all attachment. He must learn to see with the same eye a mound of earth and a heap of gold, a cow and a sage, a dog and the man who eats the dog. There's another intelligence beyond the mind.
So the Bhagavad Gita, which is sometimes referred to as the Hindu Bible, is in reality a small section of the Mahabharata. It's this scene on the eve of the great battle between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, in which Krishna, Arjuna's charioteer, is trying to convince him to fulfill his dharma as a kshatriyan and to fulfill his family duty to his brothers, to go in and fight valiantly in battle the next day, despite the fact that he knows that he is going to be fighting against his cousins, who are his blood relatives and many of whom are his friends from an early age. While the Bhagavad Gita, which means the divine song, is of course an extremely important Hindu text, it's a slight misnomer to call it the Hindu Bible. It's not equally important to all Hindus, and it's much more important to Vaishnavas than it is to Shaivites. But if the question, what is the Hindu Bible, comes up in pub trivia, the answer is the Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita was an inspirational text for Mahatma Gandhi, who read it every day. It was one of the first so-called sacred books of the East available in translation in English, and was inspirational for American writers like Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalists. Robert Oppenheimer, the co-creator of the atomic bomb, after watching the first test, quoted Krishna in the Gita saying, "Behold, I have become death, destroyer of worlds." The text is sometimes referred to as the fifth Veda. It summarizes in Vaishnava theological terms some of the more profound teachings of the Upanishads, and is at its core a treatise on dharma, or social duty, reinforced by notions of classical Hindu theology. Krishna explains to Arjuna that the true nature of the self is the Atman, the immortal soul, and explains to him that wise people, religious adepts, are those who have gone beyond the elementary mistake of confusing the self with a capital S with their material body. It's true, as I said last lecture, that the four Purusha Arthas, or aims of life, from the point of view of classical Hinduism, are dharma, or virtue and social duty, artha, or wealth, material prosperity, kama, or physical pleasure, and finally moksha, or freedom from rebirth. This includes kama and artha as two of the four aims of life. Enjoyment of physical pleasure and the pursuit of wealth are not forbidden in classical Hinduism. They are expected and in some sense necessary for a well-lived life. But Krishna reminds Arjuna that happiness derived from the fulfillment of worldly desires does not last. As one grows old, one realizes that everything is transient: wealth, possessions, health, and even life itself. This is a very Buddhist theme. The Buddhist answer to this, parenthetically, is to just give up your desire for those things, for wealth and possessions and physical pleasure. The Hindu answer, and the answer of the Bhagavad Gita, is the discovery of the self beyond the body, the component of the human being that endures, that is passed on from lifetime to lifetime, transient from one body to another, the immortal Atman, the soul or self, and admonishes that the realization of our own inner divine nature comes not through bodily pleasure, but through the dissociation with the physical body and the gradual dissolution of the ego being the self-centered orientation that one's fate is a product of one's own making, sense of pride in one's accomplishments as one's own, and general orientation and viewing the world as instrumental to one's own purposes, goals, desires, and ends. Krishna explains to Arjuna that there are 3 paths, optional paths, which one can follow, all of which lead to the dissolution of the ego, and all of which lead to eventual release from the cycle of rebirth, to moksha. The paths here are called yogas, which is a bit confusing for a first-time reader of the Gita, because Krishna doesn't mean here postural yoga, like doing mountain pose or headstands or bodily contortion. Yoga is cognate with the English word yoke. In the case of postural yoga, like you do for exercise, this is yoking the body, mind, and breath together in alignment. In the case of the yogas of the Bhagavad Gita, it means yoking, attaching yourself to a set of religious precepts and practices. Yoga here is better translated as discipline. So the 3 paths or disciplines, the 3 yogas that Krishna outlines, are all equally effective, but are recommended for people of different dispositions, people with different personalities. So the path of knowledge, jnana yoga, is suitable for introspective, reflective people who are okay spending time with themselves, thinking and doing meditation. This is the path for yogis in ashrams, jnana yoga. For someone who always needs to be doing things, someone who's very active, someone who's very sociable, Krishna recommends karma yoga, the path of action. This is, by the way, the specific path advocated for Arjuna. And finally, the path that we'll discuss more next week is that of devotion, single-minded devotion to a god or goddess, such that your every action is imagined as a moment of worship to him or her. What is the relationship between the dissolution of the ego and release from the cycle of rebirth, moksha? The Gita really gives no hard and fast answers here. Krishna explains that consciousness and the immortal aspect of our being is known as Purusha, whereas the body is made of gross matter or Prakriti. Like the subtle secrets of the moment of cosmogenesis, according to the hymn to creation, the Nasadiya Sukta and the Rig Veda, this distinction between Purusha and Prakriti can be comprehended by intense introspection and meditation. Later systems of yoga, including Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, explains that a meditator, through sustained practice, gains awareness over increasingly subtle levels of matter which constitute the body, finally realizing the non-identity of the conscious mind with Prakriti, the material body. At the end of the day, though, there is a deeply mystical dimension to the Gita. All things and all substance, all Purusha and all Prakriti, ultimately reside within Krishna, he says. So in chapter 11, Arjuna asks to see Krishna's divine form, his Virata Rupa. Krishna reveals to him all of his divine form at once. He appears with an infinite number of faces, ornamented by heavenly jewels. He displays all of these miracles. He grows himself up to cosmic heights. He shows off all of his amazing weapons. And he says, "Behold, Arjuna, 1,000,000 divine forms with an infinite variety of color and shape. Behold the entire cosmos turning within my body." So Krishna is Vishnu, and he is, like the God of the Old Testament here, the Alpha and the Omega, that from which all things emanate and that to which all things return. Krishna goes on to suggest that he is the Brahman, or the universal form of consciousness which resides in each of us in the form of the Atman. I am the same in all beings. I am impartial to all. They who worship me with devotion are in me, and I also in them. Here, Krishna alludes to the path of total devotion, bhakti, the path recommended for the sentimental, the romantic, and for those who tend to engage with others and with the world primarily through emotional connection. Bhakti yoga works to eliminate the ego by dedicating all of your daily actions to the god or goddess to whom you are devoted. Krishna recommends to Arjuna, if he chooses the mode of bhakti yoga, to perform each of his daily duties, no matter how mundane, as if he is doing it as a form of service, seva to Krishna. And as we'll see in the lecture for next week, seva, service to a god or goddess, is the predominant form of devotional activity in Hindu temples to Krishna and his wife Radha. So seva, or daily service, there means the priests actually changing the clothes of the gods and goddesses daily, feeding them 3 times a day, performing music for their entertainment, that kind of thing. Bhakti yoga in its full form means imagining that the god or the goddess is really physically with you as a part of your daily life. It's a very celebratory and joyous kind of religious disposition to imagine that the god or the goddess is a kind of character that you're interacting with as you would a member of your own family. Karma yoga, the path of action, similarly entails dissociation of any self-directive motives with your daily activity. Krishna here explains to Arjuna that he should perform the duties that are prescribed to him as a member of his caste and as a person of his station. So he's a royal Kshatriyan warrior prince, but to never consider himself to be the singular cause of his own success if he's successful, nor to be preoccupied by failure if he does what's expected of him as a Kshatriyan, but he's not successful. So even if he loses the battle, this isn't the point, according to Krishna. And to do either, to be attached to the outcome of your actions, whether it's success or failure, is to engage in a kind of fallacy of logic wherein you see yourself as the sole agent or determiner of these outcomes. In reality, it's all up to Krishna, right? This is all up to God, whatever the outcome is. The outcome itself is really out of your control. The thing that's in your control is living in accordance with the guidelines of Dharma, the guidelines of social duty as they are outlined in the Dharma Shastras, or the law books of classical Hinduism. The utilitarian argument in classical Hinduism for the path of action is that by everyone performing their caste duty as appropriate to them, society functions as an integral unit. So the only way society can function is if priests do their priestly job, warrior kings do their warrior job, their political job, Vaishyas do their middle class jobs, and Shudras do their menial class jobs. And this is a long-standing idea within the tradition, as we'll see later on, even one that Gandhi himself adhered to, which makes karma yoga, the path of action, out to be a traditionalist and really a kind of conservative mode of religious understanding. Bhakti yoga, as we'll see next week, has the potential to be a more subversive mode. But karma yoga, because it advocates caste, it advocates dharma, fulfilling your duty to your caste, remains a pretty conservative mode of thinking. Those are the 3 paths. I'd like to comment on what I see finally as the real difficult, vexatious, even morally worrisome aspect to the Gita. So Krishna at one point says to Arjuna that wise people see the same soul in all beings, whether it's a Brahmin, a cow, an elephant, a dog, or the actual word here is dog cooker. Swapaka, or a dog cooker. It means an untouchable, someone who's below even level of a Shudra. In other words, the soul of God, divine essence, Brahman and Atman, is equally present in all sentient life, in all people and in all animals. The mind of God is there in Arjuna, it's there in his good guy brothers, but it's also there by implication in his evil cousins, the Kauravas. So how do you know if you're a good guy or a bad guy, or what makes someone a good guy or a bad guy, if everyone has a soul and if everyone's soul is divine by nature? Certainly there are moral rules or precepts outlined in the Dharma Shastras, the law books, and elsewhere, and it's not as if classical Hinduism had a fundamentally different view of what it means to be a good and moral person than we do today. But there are also all sorts of other social expectations, some of which can potentially come into conflict with one another, which is indeed the basic subject matter and plot driving device of both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, conflicts of duty or conflicts of dharma and obligations. So there's basic morality, but there's also caste duty. There's civic duty, your duty as a ruler to your citizens, or your duty as a knight to your feudal lord. There is family duty, certain prescribed duties to members of your family. And there are also certain obligations that you impose upon yourself by making oaths or promises. So this is why Rama and Sita have to leave the kingdom in the Ramayana, because Dasharatha has made this promise to one of his wives that he would grant her any wish. So she wishes that her son be made king and that Rama be banished. And Yudhishthira, in a more frivolous example, promises that he will sign over his kingdom and even his life to his cousins when he loses the dice game. And he loses, and he has to uphold this promise. So we have all these the epics. The driving force of the narratives of the epics is negotiating these kinds of conflicts of duty. The subject of the Gita is Krishna telling Arjuna to fight. This is the whole thing. He goes through all these arguments of why Arjuna needs to, the next morning, get up and go fight his cousins. But if, hypothetically, Krishna were on the other side of the battlefield, and one of the Kauravas was having the same crisis of conscience as was Arjuna, what would Krishna tell him? On the basis of everything else he says in the Gita, you would think that Krishna would tell him the same thing, and for the same reasons, that he needs to go out and fight. All of the characters on both sides of the conflict are merely projections of the mind of God, the mind of Vishnu. The Sanskrit word expressing this is Leela, or reality as a kind of divine drama. In this case, this is all happening in the dream of Vishnu as he lies asleep on the cosmic ocean. The point is that Krishna says a lot about yoga and meditation throughout the Gita, but he never admonishes Arjuna to renounce the world, to go out into the woods and become a sannyasi or a yogi. Quite to the contrary, he consistently reminds him of his duty as a warrior, tells him to stand his ground and to go out and fight. So what then is the ultimate teaching of the Gita? What is it telling us to do? Is the highest realization of a learned person beyond the realm of good and evil, beyond good guys and bad guys? I realize that this is a heavy question, but I invite anyone who feels up to it to get it into it on the discussion board. What is the deepest teaching of the Gita, really? It leads me to my favorite passage from the Gita, Yavan Artha Udapane Sarvataha Samputorike Tavan Sarveshu Vedeshu Brahmanasya Vijanataha. As much value as there is in a well when water is flooding all about, so much value there is in the Vedas for a Brahman who truly knows. So that is, sacred texts are completely useless, right? Sacred texts, law books and sacred texts can tell you all that they want, but the deepest teaching of this text is something that is only knowable through introspection, not something that you can learn in books. So I'll look forward to everyone's responses on the discussion board.